Well, we're testing out a new microphone today. We'll see how it goes. It's also next to my computer and the fan is turned on, which is just not cool. It's my new mic that I'm going to use for the podcast that I'm about to launch, which I'll talk about probably pretty soon in another video. But in this video, we're talking about something that a lot of people do not talk about online. And it's something I've recently mentioned in a couple other videos and I posted about it. But a lot of people in the comments requested this topic for me just to make a full video about it. So here I am, I'm gonna make a video about it. And what I'm talking about is infrared pollution filters. So when I started shooting on raw cameras, you know, the original Red cameras, the Red Epic, stuff like that. And then of course, even on the original Blackmagic Cinema Camera I used to have, those cameras did not come with built-in infrared filters. So what infrared filters do is they actually filter out infrared light, just like the name says. So infrared light is on the spectrum of light where it's kind of just outside the realm, the spectrum of what our eyes can see. But these cameras can start to see infrared light when you put a lot of ND filters on them. Basically, the more glass you put in front of it to block out light, the more that infrared light starts to show up on your sensor. So this is very common when it comes to stuff like black shirts and stuff like that. In the past, I've tried it on my Ursa Mini, and I was filming my wife once, and she was wearing a dark green jacket, and that jacket looked completely red-orange just because of the material it was made of and how it absorbed and reflected infrared light on the Ursa Mini. I didn't have an infrared filter to block it out. Actually, I did have a very expensive infrared filter that I got back in the day that I used to use on Red cameras, and it worked really well. It has a red cast on it. It's called a hot mirror. So I think it's supposed to basically reflect away infrared light. But I've tried that filter on a lot of Blackmagic cameras, and it doesn't seem to take away any of the infrared pollution. Let me just take a step back here though. So your Blackmagic cameras, all of them, I mean your Pocket 4K, your Pocket 6K, your Ursa Mini, they all have infrared pollution. I've tested these out. I've seen it myself, and that's what we're going to try to talk about filtering out today. Now, that other filter did not work because it's clearly reflecting the wrong spectrum of infrared. So I did some research on this a little bit, and what I came across, there's a company called Raw Light that make a infrared filter that you can actually put inside your camera behind the lens. You can basically install it in there where the old infrared filter was at. I think the Blackmagic cameras come with it. I know the Blackmagic Pocket 6K and Ursa Mini on those NDs, the internal NDs, 6K Pro, they actually have infrared filters built into them, but still all the infrared pollution does not go away. They work, but they don't work super well, which is kind of a bummer. But for these cameras and how much they cost, it's kind of to be expected. So it brings me to my next point. If you are going to get an infrared filter for your camera, which I highly recommend you do, you're going to want to get one that actually has a red cast on it and a blue cast. The ones with also the blue coating on them actually work on the Blackmagic Pocket 4K and 6K cameras. Now I've been testing it out on my Pocket 6K, but I've seen online that they work on the 4K as well. But today I'm going to show you some footage side by side just so you can see the difference between the two. Okay, but before I show you some actually side by side comparisons of what it looks like with the filter, let's talk about today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. Listen, if you don't have a website, it's time to make one, and you're going to probably just want to do that with Squarespace because it's super easy. You pick out one of their pre-existing templates, you modify it how you want your website to look and feel. You can upload your video content there so easy. You just embed your Vimeo links or your YouTube links or whatever you want to do. And then, put all your contact information on there, and you'll have a website so people can actually hire you for your video work. So if that's something you're interested in, you can click the link in the description to get 10% off. And I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you recall, a couple videos back, I was talking about the Gen 5 color science on Blackmagic cameras, and I actually compared it to an Arri Alexa. I talked about how it was kind of weird that there was like a little bit of a cyan shift on the black shirt in the footage versus a kind of more red shift on the Pocket. And that's exactly what that was. That was infrared pollution. That was infrared light polluting the black shirt and being absorbed by the camera's sensor. So I want to do some research on this. I found a blue cast infrared filter on Amazon. It's made by a company called ICE, I-C-E. They use Comic Sans as their font. It was hard to trust the company right out of the gate, but I did it anyways. It was only a $40 or $50 filter. I've already posted about this on my community posts on YouTube, but I thought this video would be more helpful so you can actually see how well it works. So I got the 77mm filter because that's the filter size that I use on all my lenses, but you you know, if you're going to get one, get the filter size that makes sense for the lenses that you own. And I thought I would give it a try and see how it goes. It's fairly inexpensive, and if it gets rid of all of the infrared pollution on all my footage, that would be amazing. And turns out it did. It actually works really, really well, and I'm really excited that I got it. So let's look at some footage here real quick. So the first thing that we're gonna look at is actually just, I'm outside. So the easiest way to find infrared pollution is when you're outside and the sun is coming in, and then you're using a lot of ND to block out a lot of that light, and that's when it starts to show up on clothing. I always wear a black shirt, so this was very easy. I walked outside and just started shooting. So for this first test, I have the Sigma 18-35 on my Blackmagic Pocket 6K, and I'm just using it with 0 filters, no ND filter, no infrared filter, nothing on the front of it. All I did was change the shutter angle on the camera to block out the light. And on this first shot, I just did it at f4, just to kind of keep it more in focus, and it turns out it still wasn't even that in focus. It's kind of hard to film yourself without autofocus. That's the reason this just came in the mail today to test out. The Sony FX3. I'm pretty excited about this. I'm going to test it out. I know I'm not like a big fan of Sony cameras. I don't talk about them a lot on the channel, but I'm just kind of itching for autofocus and a good image, so I wanted to try out the FX3 after all, even though I talk about the Pocket cameras all the time. Yes, I still recommend the Pocket 6K for cinema work, for your job, for paid gigs, for films, but for this might be really good for YouTube content, so that's why I'm going to just try it out for fun. That being said, so some of these shots may not be fully in focus, but that's not really the point. We're looking at the infrared pollution on my shirt. So this first one, I'm at like a 37-degree shutter. It's at 5600 Kelvin with the +10 magenta, because that's what the Pocket 6K recommends. That's what Blackmagic recommends as your daylight setting. It was a little cloudy, so I would guess the white balance is a little off, but this is just going to be our baseline for the rest of the test here. So here's the footage with that. I actually bumped up the saturation so you can kind of see the colors here. And now let's throw on the ND filter that I use the most is my moment variable ND filter. So I threw that on. I pushed it all the way to the N32 marking on it. And so you can see there's gonna be a little bit of a color shift on that just because the ND filter itself has a little bit of a color shift. And then I open up that shutter back to 180 degrees. And then I open the lens to f1.8 because I wanted to let as much light in as possible so I could ND down farther so we could really see that pollution. So you can already kind of see pollution without the ND filter on there, which is really interesting to me. You're gonna have pollution regardless if you have an ND filter on with this camera. So now obviously the next step would be to put the ICE IR cut filter onto the camera, and then you can see the difference here. So here's just a baseline look at it. And then here is when we crank up the saturation so you can really see where the red and blues and the black change. So it's very significant. There's a lot of red pollution in my shirt when it's just the ND. You can tell it's a little bit more of a blue cyan shift now on my black, which I just think looks better. Regardless if it's more neutral, I just think the blue looks better than the red. Problem with the red is that IR pollution is like literal light pollution. It's not a cast of color. So if you wanted to go in and just like kind of remove that red, you could to some extent, but when you get it into post and you want to color grade it out, it's not as easy to color grade out pollution. So what's great about using this filter, even if this filter is not doing a perfect job, at least it's getting you to a better baseline that you can color grade properly. So I mean, for sure, the filter definitely works, definitely recommend it. A lot of other filters give like pretty like big casts. I don't see any big major green cast on this. It seems like it really is only targeting the areas where there was infrared pollution. And so that's great. So I highly recommend this for pocket cameras, but we're not really done here. So this is just in a daylight environment. So another environment that you might be shooting in would be with a tungsten light on an interior shot. So tungsten lights alone, without any ND filters, add a lot of infrared pollution to these cameras. So I just grabbed a tungsten bulb, put it in my lamp, and then I just turn on the lamp right in front of my face. And so it's a little dark here, but you can see when I boost everything up that there's a ton of red in my shirt. And this is actually white balance for tungsten. It's not like this is an off-white balance so that red is coming through. This is white balance at 3200 Kelvin. And it's super red. But of course, all I have to do is put that filter in front of the lens and that red goes away. So not a lot of people talk about this because a lot of modern cameras have infrared filters built into them. But what's weird about Blackmagic cameras, and if you're looking at like the Ursa Mini Pro and stuff like that, those built-in ND filters do have infrared cuts on them, but they don't seem to be doing the job all the way. Now, I don't have one here right now to test that out, but I've done some research online and I've seen that. So it's just something to be aware of. I think a lot of people might say that this isn't a problem for them. Like, my footage looks great. But when you start getting down to the nitty gritty and start comparing it to other cameras, you can see that your image does have this pollution in there. You're just not really noticing it at the time. But it's something that like a $40, $50 fix, you just throw it on the front of the lens and it fixes it for you. It's what I'm going to do from now on using this camera. And so back to the other company called Raw Light, they make one that can go actually insert inside the camera, but it's pretty expensive. It's like $600, something like that. You have to install it yourself, which seems fairly easy, but then you have to shim your lenses to make sure that you get your infinity focus back and stuff like that. And so I don't feel like it's the best deal, but it is nice that it would just completely replace the internal filters for you. It also adds I believe a Moray filter, which is nice. So that might be something worth looking into. I will put the links to everything that I'm talking about here in the description below. So if you actually want to permanently install one just on your camera so you don't have to worry about putting a filter in front of your lens, you can do that. Or you can just do what I'm doing, and I'm just going to throw this $50 filter on the front of everything I shoot. It's going to be annoying taking it off and on, but who cares? I'm going to put it on when I put on ND filter on either way.